Have you ever imagined finding a wallet on the floor full of money, just on the day when you don't even have anything to eat? What if you were just a kid, alone in the world? What would you do? This is the true story of an orphan girl of only 9 years old who walked barefoot on the sidewalks, trying to sell flowers to get a piece of bread. Rejected, ignored by passers-by, she carried in her eyes the weight of someone who has experienced more pain than many adults. But that day, fate put something different in her path. A dropped wallet, fat, heavy, full of notes, and with an important name in there. There was no one around, no camera, no look, just her and her wallet. It was a chance to satisfy his hunger, to buy the snack he dreamed of, but it was also the chance to do something bigger, something right, and that's when this story stopped being common. Because what this girl chose to do, even in misery, showed a greatness that many people who have everything will never be able to achieve. Have you ever been there? Have you ever found yourself between need and awareness? Have you ever had to decide between what you want and what is right? This girl did, and her choice was so powerful that the next day a man appeared. He was not just any man, he was the owner of the wallet, and his attitude would also change everything. This story is not about money. It's about character, about courage, about how a simple gesture coming from someone no one expected can turn on a light in a dark world. It's about a girl who never had anything, but who, with a single gesture, conquered everything. And when this man showed up at the orphanage, something happened, something that no one could have imagined. Because sometimes life chooses the most forgotten to show the strongest lessons. If you also believe that good still exists, or want to believe again, then stay with me until the end of this story. It can change the way you see the world. Before that, enjoy the video, subscribe here to the channel and share it with someone who needs hope. Because what happens next, it's chilling. The city woke up in grayish tones that morning. The sky was covered by dense clouds, as if reflecting what was going on in the heart of those who walked in a hurry along the cold sidewalks. Between hurried steps and distracted looks, a small figure clashed with the scenery. A girl of only 9 years old, slight with bare feet, and her hair flowing over her shoulders. She wore a threadbare dress which had long since lost its original color, and carried in her hands a small bundle of withered flowers tied by a shredded string. Each flower was a hope. Each failed attempt to sell one of those petals was yet another reminder that the world wasn't looking at it. No one stopped, no one smiled. She was invisible, or perhaps too bothersome to be noticed. He passed between cars, among people in elegant clothes and expensive cell phones, offering in a soft voice what he could, and in return he received only silence, crossed looks, and sometimes a slight push out of the way. My stomach was already hurting. The last meal had been a shallow bowl of soup the day before at the orphanage, nothing more than that, but she didn't complain. I had already learned too soon that complaining doesn't feed anyone. Then she continued, silent, with her eyes large and sunken, full of a melancholy that no child should carry. The sidewalks of the city were hard, dirty, merciless, but it was in them that she walked every day, trying to find a little kindness in faces that no longer knew what it was to stop to listen. At every corner, at every failed attempt, something inside her shrank a little more. And it was between one crossing and another, in the middle of the sidewalk wet by the early morning drizzle, that his eyes stopped on something different. There, between a manhole cover and a pile of crumpled papers, rested a wallet, black, leather, thick, and apparently full. For a moment she froze. Time seemed to slow down all around. People kept walking as if that scene didn't matter. But for her, that object lying on the ground carried a huge weight. His eyes fixed on his wallet. Then they moved from side to side. Nobody, no owner around, no witnesses. He crouched slowly, feeling the cold of the cement on his legs. The hand hesitated before touching the dark leather, wet at the edges. When he opened the flap, his heart raced. Notes, lots of notes, more than she had ever seen in her life. And between the compartments, a rigid card with gold letters and a name that seemed important, an entrepreneur, an address, everything there. Inside that wallet was more than money. There was a choice. She held it tight, feeling the weight The wind blew hard as if trying to wrest any certainty from her. The stomach screamed, hunger mingled with fear, and fear was confused with doubt. It was a world where no one looked after her. No one cared if they were cold, hungry, or crying alone at night. So why should she care now? The shoes of passers-by continued to beat rhythmically on the concrete. No one had noticed. No one would mind if she put that wallet in her pocket and disappeared among the city streets. And yet, she didn't move. He stood there, his eyes fixed, on that piece of leather that now weighed like an entire decision. On his chest, an old memory, the mother's voice, a whisper almost forgotten but one that echoed strongly. And in front of that cold sidewalk, with trembling hands and an empty stomach, the girl took a deep breath. What would come next? That was yet to happen. If this story has touched you this far, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel to follow the rest. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? The wallet remained between the girl's small hands, now slightly trembling. The cold leather, the smooth texture, and the weight of it all seemed bigger than the reality around him. She sat slowly on the curb, ignoring the coldness of the concrete that invaded her thin and unprotected body. It was as if the whole world had been silent for an instant, leaving only her thoughts loud and clear, reverberating inside her chest. She opened her wallet more carefully this time. The bills were organized in bundles of high values. There was enough money to buy not just a snack, but maybe new clothes, shoes, books, even toys for the other children in the orphanage. It was hard to imagine all those possibilities. Every note she saw seemed to whisper a promise, a warm dinner, a soft blanket, the chance to sleep without cold or fear. His stomach ached harder now, as if awakened by the sight of it all. But it was when he saw the card that everything became quieter. Inside, a thick white business card with gold letters and an imposing name. A name she had heard before. Someone from television, perhaps. Or a conversation between the adults of the orphanage. Someone important, influential. And once again, she looked around. Nobody. The wallet was still there, intact, discovered only by her. The city did not see her. The city never saw her. I never asked how I was. He never offered a hand. When the flowers were too wilted to be sold, she would return to the orphanage in silence, her feet aching, her head down, and her heart a little heavier. I knew that money would make a difference. She knew that no one would blame her if she took at least a share. After all, who would let so much money fall in the middle of the street, in a neighborhood where children sell flowers to survive? But there was something stronger than hunger. A memory, subtle, almost buried in time, but still alive. The last time he saw his mother, a dry cough, the torn sheet, and that phrase said between faint sighs, "Even when no one is looking, be good, my daughter. Always." At the time, she didn't quite understand the weight of those words. Now, there, in the middle of the damp concrete and surrounded by the rush of strangers, everything made sense. She ran her thin fingers over the name on the card, feeling the texture of the letters. That name seemed to open a door, a different possibility. But to achieve it, he would have to do what many would not do. I would have to deliver that. Everything. Not knowing if he would have anything in return, not knowing if anyone would even believe her. Because when you're small, poor and orphaned, even the truth is often questioned. Her eyes watered, but she blinked steadily. I knew I couldn't make a mistake. Not at that moment. Something told her that this decision mattered, not for the money, but for what no one could see, what she carried inside. A force that even she didn't know existed, until she needed to use. The flowers fell to the ground as she stood up. The wind blew harder, pushing her hair back and cooling her already battered body even more. But she was still holding her wallet, now firmly. He knew that every step he took from then on would carry a weight. And maybe, just maybe, that weight was the key to a new story, even though she still had no idea what it would be like. With her wallet pressed to her chest, the girl took a deep breath, feeling the cold cross the thin fabric of the already worn dress. His thin body trembled, but not from fear. This time, it was something else, something he still couldn't name, but which burned in his chest as if a small spark had been ignited. The steps began slowly, hesitantly. The heart was racing. With each street he crossed, Doubt tried to return, whispering that there was still time to give up, to turn left and disappear with all that, but she kept going. With each step, she made a silent decision to do what she believed was right, even if no one saw her, even if no one thanked her. She knew where the police station was. She had passed by a few times, looking from afar without ever feeling invited to enter. It was a cold place with tall windows and a heavy door, but that day he pushed the door with both hands. The environment inside smelled of stale coffee and damp paper. Her eyes met those of one of the police officers at the counter, a tall man with a tired expression who looked her up and down with some suspicion. It was hard not to be suspicious. A lonely, dirty child with withered flowers and a wallet that clearly wasn't hers. She reached out slowly, handing the object with the care of someone offering something fragile, almost sacred. The man took his wallet, opened it, saw the contents and frowned. He called another policeman, more looks, more questions. She remained steadfast. He answered everything he remembered in a low but firm voice. He told where he found it, the approximate time, how he had kept it carefully. And even though she was treated with a mixture of suspicion and surprise, she did not back down. She was used to not being taken seriously, but at that moment, I didn't want to taste anything. I just wanted to give it back. The police, after confirming their identity by card, began to look at each other with more serious expressions. One of them said something on the phone. Another wrote down information on a piece of paper. She watched everything in silence, her eyes fixed on the hands that handled the wallet, as if she feared that something would slip away. After a few minutes, she was asked to sign a paper. She didn't know what was written, but she held the pen as if signing a pact with her own conscience. The policeman, now less tense, thanked him with a discreet wave. No hugs, no smile. Just an almost automatic gesture, as if they didn't even know how to deal with that honesty coming from such an unlikely place. When he left the station, the sky was already darkening. The afternoon had passed while she was inside, and, as if he wanted to wash everything around, the rain began to fall, big icy drops punishing the asphalt and her face at the same time. But she didn't run. He did not hide. He walked through the storm as if returning from a silent battle. The clothes stuck to the body, the hair dripped, and yet there was a different calm in his eyes. A calm that did not come from having received something, but from having left something behind. Doubt, fear, regret. She returned to the orphanage as if returning from an unknown place. The city looked the same, but something inside it had changed. The gates were closed as always. She knocked slowly 3 times, waiting for one of the caregivers to come open. No one asked where he had been. No one wanted to know if he had sold any flowers. But they didn't reprimand her either. After all, in that place it was enough to return in one piece. And she came back, soaking wet, tired, but entire. That night, lying on her thin mattress, her feet still cold, she felt her stomach ache again. The soup had run out when it arrived, but curiously that hunger didn't seem as heavy as before. There was something stronger filling the void, a quiet certainty that, despite everything, he had done the right thing. And even without knowing it, she had started something that the next day he would knock on the door. Night fell with the same routine silence in the orphanage, a silence interrupted only by the muffled sounds of hurried footsteps in the hallways, distant laughter from children who had not yet tired of playing, and the steady voices of caregivers, trying to maintain order before turning out the lights. It was a well-known ritual. By this time the kitchen was already closed, the smell of thin soup still hanging in the air as a bitter reminder of the meal repeated too much. The plastic, cups piled on the sink, the stained tablecloth on the table, the empty bowls. All the same, there in the dormitory, the atmosphere followed the same tone. A row of beds, thin sheets, some armless dolls scattered in the corners, and coats hanging from improvised hooks. The girl lay down slowly, her body still damp, her hair glued to her forehead, and her light dress sticking to her skin. No one noticed that she arrived later. No one asked where he had been, and perhaps this was the most common of all. That was a house full of invisible children, but something about her was different. It was not visible to the eye, at least not to those who looked too fast, as everyone there did. It was internal. A new stillness. A silent peace that seemed to have sprouted under the skin, in some corner of the chest. She didn't talk about what she had done. I didn't even plan to tell her. I didn't expect congratulations, compliments, or even that anyone would believe it. I just wanted to close my eyes with the feeling I was experiencing for the first time, that of having done something important, even without anyone around to see. In the darkness of the room, the sounds of other breaths filled the space. Some slept quickly. Others tossed and turned in their beds, trying to escape nightmares that no one else could hear. She, however, remained motionless for a while, with her eyes open, watching the shadow that the moonlight cast on the peeling wall. And there, in the silence between one memory and another, she felt that she was no longer as empty as she used to feel. The world could continue to ignore it, but she knew who she was, and that for now was enough. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where the gates are high and the windows thick, the lights had not yet gone out. In a large office lined with dark wood and old books, a middle-aged man was intently watching a paper on the table. The police report, fresh from the police station. The wallet now rested next to him, open. Everything was there, intact. No notes. Taken out. No cards out of place. Even the small note he used to keep folded between documents was still there, exactly where he always left it. He held the bulletin firmly. The eyes passed through the letters as if they were looking for something. Beyond words, there was the name of the policeman who attended him, the description of the lost object, and a note in hurried handwriting. Wallet returned by a minor, apparently homeless. Girl of 8 or 9 years old. No identification. This phrase kept repeating in his head, as if each syllable carried an echo. Girl, alone, no data, no family, nothing. But the gesture. Returning an amount like that without hesitation was rare, and even rarer coming from those who have nothing. He dropped the paper on the table and leaned back in the armchair, his eyes fixed on an invisible spot on the Walbahassam. The mind went back to another time, an old memory buried by years of cold decisions and compromises, an uncomfortable memory of when he himself was a boy, from when he also had to choose between the right and the easiest, and it failed. That's why now it weighed so much. The image of the girl was a blur. He still didn't know what she looked like, where she lived, or even her name. But I knew I had to find her, not out of obligation, nor out of gratitude. There was something bigger behind that gesture, something that went beyond the logic of what is lost and what is returned. That child had done something that shook certainties, that crossed the coldness of numbers, meetings, contracts. He got up from his chair slowly, walked to the window and looked at the city below. The lights of the cars scratched the avenues like veins pulsating under the concrete. Somewhere outside, that girl must have been asleep by now, or trying. He wondered what kind of bed, what kind of world she rested in, and as much as he didn't know the answer, something inside him had already decided. I needed to find out who she was. He had to somehow give back what she had really lost, not the money, not the wallet, but the confidence that sometimes the world still knows how to recognize the good. The morning dawned grey, with the sky still overcast and the cold wind sweeping through the orphanage's corridors. Inside, the usual sounds echoed between the walls, doors being opened in a hurry, children's voices blending into a tangle of phrases and calls, footsteps running barefoot on the icy floor. For most, it was just another start to the day like so many others, but something still imperceptible was moving in the direction of that place. The girl had woken up early, as usual. Despite the cold night, he had slept soundly, not because he was comfortable, but because he felt a lightness he had not known for a long time. She washed her face with the cold water of the collective sink, straightened her hair as best she could with her fingers, and, as always, went to the cafeteria, in silence. I didn't expect anything different. Dry bread, thin milk, and the same feeling of invisibility. It was what I knew. It was what he expected. But outside the gate of the orphanage was surprised by an unusual sound, the soft roar of a large, powerful engined car. It was a shiny, black sedan that stopped slowly in front of the main entrance. The driver quickly got out and opened the rear door, from which a man with an imposing posture, well-dressed with a determined look and firm steps, emerged. Behind him, 2 assistants followed the movement with discretion. The man, however, seemed oblivious to any pomp. His eyes scanned the room attentively, as if looking for something he had already seen in his thoughts. The director of the orphanage appeared at the entrance shortly after, confused, frightened by the sudden presence. That kind of visit was not common, and the name that the visitor pronounced caused even more astonishment. The businessman was known, a respected name, associated with great social projects, successful businesses, magazine covers. But that was not what made him uneasy. It was the reason for the visit. He did not come to make donations nor to promote charitable campaigns. He was coming because of a girl. The news ran through the halls like an electric whisper. Some caregivers looked at each other. Others ran to organize the most visible environments. But the girl went on at her pace, not knowing what was unfolding beyond the walls. She was busy with her bowl of milk and the small piece of bread, sitting in the corner of the table away from the hubbub, until one of the caregivers approached, hesitantly, and asked her to accompany her. The girl obeyed, without understanding. He walked through the corridors he knew well, but this time with his heart racing. There was something different about that calling, something he didn't know how to name. When she reached the main room, she saw the man. He was standing in front of the headmaster and turned slowly as she entered. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. He watched her calmly, as if confirming an image he had already imagined. She, in turn, froze, the big eyes fixed on him, trying to decipher the reason for so much attention. Her trembling hands squeezed the fabric of her old dress. Her small body shrank almost instinctively, as if she feared a punishment she did not understand. The man walked up to her. The firm steps carried no threat, but they were not familiar either. As he crouched in front of him, their eyes met. She saw something there that she had not seen for a long time, a look that really saw her. Not as someone who analyzes, judges, or measures, but as someone who recognizes. The silence between them lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to create an invisible bridge. His face was not what she expected. He did not look like the stern men he saw on the street, nor the hurried adults who avoided contact. There was a tiredness there, yes, but also something that reminded me of tenderness. He kept his voice low, and although there were no words at that moment, his expression said it all. It was as if he asked soundlessly, "Was it you?" And she, without the courage to speak, just nodded. The truth was there, in the eyes, in the restrained gestures, in the bated breath. He smiled, a short, almost shy, but genuine smile. And in that instant, something changed. The tension that filled the room gradually melted away, like fog dissolved in the morning. The girl did not understand the reason for that visit, nor what he expected of her. But she felt, with the sharp intuition of someone who had lived too long for her own age, that something much bigger than she imagined was about to begin. Still crouching in front of her, the man remained silent for a few seconds, carefully observing every detail of that little face so young and at the same time marked by experiences that no child should carry. It was as if, in that brief instant, he could see beyond his frail appearance, beyond his faded clothes and scruffy hair. Her eyes, as dark as they were deep, reflected more than curiosity or fear. There was a silent maturity in them, that of those who learned early on that life is not always fair, but still insist on doing the right thing. He stood up slowly, nodded to the headmaster, and pointed gently to the back garden. The caregiver hesitated for a second, but eventually allowed the two to leave. It was rare for visitors to stay so long, let alone in private conversations, but this man looked different, and somehow he exuded a calm that was difficult to dispute. The garden, though simple, offered a bit of green and some shade. It was the only corner of the orphanage where the noise of the corridors did not reach so strongly. The man walked next to the girl in silence, without forcing conversation. I just watched, I felt. When they reached the wooden bench, they sat down, she with her body tense and her hands clasped between her knees, he with his arms resting on his legs and his gaze fixed on the low trees ahead. Gradually, with a care, that only those who understand invisible pain can offer. He began to ask questions, not tough questions nor investigative ones, just curious. I wanted to know her name, if she liked flowers, if she read any books, if she had siblings. And she, little by little, allowed herself to respond. First with short sentences, then with longer pauses. Until, without realizing it, he began to count. He told how he arrived at the orphanage after his mother's death. She told of the cold days, the nights when she cried curled up in bed, the fear she felt of the screams of the adults, the feeling of emptiness that never went away. He also talked about flowers, how he learned to tie with string, how he sometimes dreamed that he was in a classroom, drawing with new colored pencils. He said he wanted to study, that I wanted to learn, not to be someone important, but because she always believed that books had something that could take her away, even if only for a few pages. The man listened without interrupting. There was no hurry. There were no trials, just presence. And with each new sentence, his eyes seemed to change expression. The brilliance that was once one of analysis was now one of tenderness. And little by little, that space between them, which once seemed like an abyss between two worlds, was narrowing. When she finished speaking, there was nothing more to say. She stood silently, staring at the floor, not knowing if she had said too much or if it would make any difference. But something about her had calmed down. For the first time in a long time, I felt that someone had really listened. He, on the other hand, remained immobile for a time, as if processing each word, as if reliving in silence the images she had painted with her memories. And then he looked up at her. His were now different. There was moisture in them, not of sadness, but of something deeper, rarer, a genuine commotion which is born when the soul is touched by something pure. He said few words, not with the voice of a powerful man, but with the sincerity of one who understands that some truths do not need adornments. And when he said that he had never met someone so honest, he was not exaggerating. He was confessing, if I had a daughter, I would want it to be like that. With the courage to do the right thing even when the world turns its back. With sensitivity, to see beauty in withered flowers. With the strength to move forward, even without anyone around. She listened to those words without knowing what to do with them. He lowered his eyes, moved his fingers nervously, and felt his heart beat faster. I wasn't used to compliments, even less to this kind of affection, that which comes without interest, without obligation, without pretense. And in that silence, something changed. It was not a noisy, visible change. It was like the beginning of a spring, which no one sees, happening, but feels it in the air. Something had begun, not only in her life, but also in his. And even though neither of them could explain exactly, they felt that this conversation would mark the beginning of something new, still unnamed, but already full of meaning. The wind blew softly that late afternoon, shaking the branches of the few trees in the garden and causing small dry leaves to spin on the ground as if dancing. The conversation between the two had ended without haste, without fanfare, just with a silence full of everything that was said and, especially, of what did not need to be verbalized. When the man stood up and discreetly thanked the director before leaving, no one quite understood what had happened there. But it was enough to look at the girl's face still sitting on the wooden bench, to realize that something different was in the air. There was a new sparkle in his eyes, shy, almost hidden, but present. A glimmer of hope being born in a soil that for a long time seemed infertile. The night came like so many others. Dinner continued with the same watery soup, the same metallic sounds of spoons scratching the bottom of the plates. In the dormitory, the mattresses were still thin and the blankets too short, but she lay down with one weight less on her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he slept without having to shrink. The thought flew to that garden, to that conversation. It wasn't exactly what he said, but how he said it. There was truth. There was heat. Something she barely remembered feeling. And perhaps that was what had touched her the most. The next morning, the first movements of the orphanage were accompanied by quiet anticipation. Something was different, even though no one could say exactly what. The routine unfolded as usual, but there was a buzz that grew among the caregivers, a more hurried coming and going in the corridors, whispers exchanged near the doors, until the gate opened again and the black car returned, parking in front of the entrance with the same precision and elegance as the day before. This time the impact was greater. Everyone was attentive. The director came personally to receive the visitor, this time more prepared, more tense. The man entered with the same calmness, but with a different firmness in his gaze. He carried a briefcase under his arm, carefully closed. He did not bring security guards or assistants, only him. And when he was led to the meeting room, he made it clear that he wanted to talk to everyone. Management, social workers, legal guardians. The meeting lasted longer than expected. Voices were heard outside, sometimes calm, sometimes loaded with surprise. And when the door opened, the news spread with the force of a wave that suddenly invades the beach. He wanted to adopt her. The revelation went through the corridors of the orphanage like a bolt of lightning. The children commented, between amazement and excitement. Some smiled, others turned up their noses. The caregivers reacted differently, some with admiration, others with reservation. It was not common for a man of that level, with that visibility, to want to take custody of a child without a family, without a surname, without anything to link him to her. But he was decided. He brought all the documents. I had already consulted lawyers, judges, social workers, all within the law. You're all set. The only thing missing now, it was her. When she was called, the girl thought she had done something wrong. Never had she been called with such urgency. But when she entered the room and saw him there again, sitting with the same calm eyes as the day before, she felt her heart race. He stood up, extended his hand as if inviting him to cross, and she, even without understanding, walked to him. The proposal was explained patiently, in a soft, almost paternal tone. He did not promise impossible worlds. He did not promise to erase the pain or rewrite the past. But he promised to be there, care, protect, helping to build a new chapter together. She listened to everything without saying a word. He just listened, feeling the world around him become diffuse, the voices, the faces, the walls of the room. Everything seemed far away. It was like being in the middle of a dream too good to be real. When they placed the papers in front of her, with lines that said her name, his, and words like guardian, adoption, filiation, her hands began to tremble. The pen felt heavy. His fingers slipped. Her chest tightened, as if the feeling that was trying to come out could not fit, and then with a suppressed sigh she signed it. The line was shaky, the print small, but there was his mark, his first step towards a life he didn't know yet. The director nodded silently. One of the caregivers discreetly wiped away a tear, and the man, now officially his father, crouched down once more as in the first meeting and smiled with his eyes. I didn't need to say anything else. Outside the garden was silent, as if waiting, and in the grey sky a shy ray of sunshine began to break through the clouds, discreetly illuminating the path she was about to take. That same day, when the papers were signed and the last formalities resolved, the girl left the orphanage without fanfare. There was no farewell party, no long hugs. Some children watched her from afar, some with envious looks, others with a curiosity that seemed to mix hope and disbelief. The caregivers, used to departures and arrivals, kept their composure. One of them lightly squeezed the girl's shoulder before she got into the car, as if silently recognizing the courage to move on to an unknown world. In the back seat of the black car, she was silent the entire time. The city passed through the windows as if it had gained another speed. The buildings seemed taller, the sidewalks wider, the sounds cleaner. It was the same city as always, but she now saw it with different eyes. His still trembling fingers rested on his lap, while his body tried to adapt to the comfortable seat and the new smell of leather and soft perfume that filled the room. For the first time, I felt no fear of what was to come, just a good strangeness, like someone who steps for the first time on a ground that doesn't hurt. The house was large but not imposing. It was welcoming, with large windows, light walls, and furniture that blended elegance with simplicity. A place that did not scream wealth but overflowed with care. She was greeted by a white-haired lady with a discreet smile, who seemed to already know her name. She showed him the room, a room of her own. The bed was soft, the sheets were clean, and there was a small bookshelf with books next to it. On the desk, a new notebook and colored pencils organized in a glass jar. In the days that followed, her world began to expand. She got new clothes, yes, comfortable clothes, without labels or exaggerations, just pieces chosen with care and attention. She learned to do her hair differently, took a hot shower every day, started to eat without haste, savoring each meal as if it were a gift. But what surprised her most was the absence of screams. No one rushed her. No one told her to shut up. For the first time, there was silence without tension. There was space. School came soon after. The uniform looked like a magical disguise that made her like the other children. I entered the room with a heavy heart at first, afraid of the looks, the whispers. But she was welcomed, not with parties, but with the simple kindness of someone who offered him a place next to him in his desk, a borrowed pencil, a smile without questions. He discovered that he liked mathematics, that he had an easy time learning languages, that he loved to read aloud. The world of knowledge opened up to her like a garden after the rain, fresh, vibrant, full of life. One afternoon, as he crossed the hallway of the house, he heard the sound of a piano coming from the living room. He stopped at the door silently. The man who was now her father played delicately, as if talking to the keys. He saw her, waved softly, and continued playing. She approached slowly, sat on the floor and stood there, listening. The music seemed to fill spaces within her that were previously dark and cold. Days later, he asked her if she wanted to learn. And she wanted to. Classes began with shy touches, hesitant notes, but little by little, like everything new in her life, she discovered that she could, and that she deserved it. Among the books, the classes, the music, and the weekend walks, there was something that could not be seen with the eyes, but that grew strongly inside the chest. A silent certainty that she now belonged, not just to that house or that school, or to the new surname he had learned to write. It belonged to life. It was part of something. It was seen. She was called by name, not by numbers or nicknames. He had a routine, he had plans. There was someone who asked how the day went and waited for the answer. Months later, there was an important public event, a benefit ceremony organized by the city's foundations, where businessmen, artists, and authorities gathered to promote social causes. The man was invited to speak, and when he went on stage, he called the girl with him. In front of a packed audience, he held her hand firmly and introduced her as her daughter, not as someone he adopted out of charity, but as someone who was now part of him, of his history, of his legacy. The applause was many, but what she kept was not the sound of clapping, but the way he looked at her. As someone who has no doubt that he made the right choice. She came down from the stage with her hands still sweaty, her heart racing, but the smile that formed on her lips was new. He was broad, sincere, free of fear. For the first time he smiled, not only for the moment, but for the future he could now imagine. The past still existed, yes. There were still scars, there were still difficult memories. But by his side now, there was also presence. There was love. And within her, finally, there was hope. Time passed unhurriedly, as if it knew that each stage of that transformation needed care. Deep roots, silences full of meaning. The girl grew up before the eyes of the man who was once just a stranger with a lost wallet, but who had now become a constant presence, a reference, a safe haven. She also grew up in front of teachers, neighbors, and classmates, who saw her as a curious, educated young woman, with a lightness that came from afar, but also with a depth that was not common for her age. She grew up without forgetting. The feet that once walked barefoot on cold sidewalks now wore comfortable shoes, but they still knew what it was like to feel the hard ground under their skin. The hands that once held withered flowers now leafed through books, typed with precision in piano lessons, helped colleagues with difficulties at school. But they still remembered what it was like to tie strings to the stems and offer hope to uncaring strangers. The eyes that once begged for attention in the streets now shone with plans, with dreams, with the tranquility of those who know they belong, but they still carried in some discreet corner of the gaze the reflection of the cold nights in which silence was all there was. She graduated from high school with honors, not only for good grades, but for having become a benchmark of resilience. It was called for events, interviews, conversation circles. Some wanted to know about adoption, about new life. But what impressed me most was the serenity with which he spoke about the past. He did not romanticize him, nor did he hide him. He only welcomed him as an essential part of who he had become. She was never ashamed to say that she was an orphan, that she went hungry, that she slept in fear. But she said even more firmly that she never stopped believing that she could choose, and that she chose the right one, even without guarantees, even alone. The man, now older, watched everything with silent admiration. There was in him the pride of someone who planted a seed and had the privilege of seeing it flourish. But there was also gratitude, because he knew that it wasn't just him who offered a new chance. She had also transformed him. It had shown him that in a world driven by haste and appearances, there was still purity. There was still choice, there was still hope. On a mild, sunny Saturday, she asked to visit the orphanage. He did not warn in advance. He arrived with a box in his arms and a quiet smile on his lips. The same gatehouse, the same walls, the same gate that had once opened to her with indifference, have now opened with surprise. The caregivers, some still the same, recognized her with astonishment and emotion. The children, curious, crowded in the corridors. She walked lightly through those corridors she knew so well, as if revisiting old pages of a remarkable book. The reading room, previously forgotten, now received the new books she brought. The closets, previously empty, gained colorful and well-kept clothes. The children received words that did not come with pity but with force. He told his story without exaggeration, without ready-made lessons. He just counted. He talked about choices, about honesty, about not letting yourself be hardened by pain. Some girls were silent, others asked questions. A small boy held her hand, tightly. And there, in the middle of that scenario that was once her reality, she understood that she was not an inspiration for having been adopted by a rich man, but for not having let hunger, pain, or abandonment make her bitter. For having kept alive the ability to choose the right, even when it seemed that no one else cared. He left the orphanage with the same silence with which he had entered years before. But this time, he had no withered flowers in his hands, no sadness in his eyes. He was sure that somewhere in the world, a girl alone can change her own destiny with a simple gesture, and that sometimes this gesture echoes for much longer than one imagines. In the end, it all started with something that fit in the palm of your hand, a forgotten wallet on the floor, a silent choice, a gesture that no one saw. But that changed everything. It's curious to think about how life sometimes tests us when we're at our most fragile, and how the response we give in those moments can completely redraw the path ahead. The girl didn't know what would come next. I didn't expect anything. But he chose what was right, and that was enough for the world around him to start moving differently. If you've made it this far, maybe this story has touched something inside. And if it did, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. There's always room here for those who believe that good is still worth it. Also, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me, just so I know that you stayed until the end and walked along with me through this story." Oh, and of course, leave your like. Not because of custom, but because this connection that we built deserves to continue. There is a video here on the side that tells a similar story, full of emotion and choices that also changed destinies. Click and stay with me there. The next story is already waiting for you.